In the last election, when the Tories inched to the point that they were going to have the largest number of seats, CBC declared it a minority conservative government.
Right.
You know, the Governor General hadn't been consulted, and I appreciate there's a convention. The Prime Minister had the right to demonstrate that he could command the support of a majority in the House. But for Peter Mansbridge to tell us it was going to be a minority conservative government struck me as a little peculiar, given that there were some other alternatives that could have transpired. And the other one, which is even more bizarre, I was out of the country when the crisis that I guess isn't a crisis occurred regarding coalition. But I was back shortly thereafter when the first confidence motion took place. And I listened to CBC Radio that week. And in light of everything that had occurred, I expected the comment. We all knew the government wasn't going to fall, but I expected the commentary that speculated about that possibility would reference the possibility of going back to the Governor General for the possibility of an alternative government being formed. No, all the commentary that week was, will the government stand or will the government fall? And the assumption was, not only the assumption, the statement was, if the government fell, there would be an election. It seemed like even the history of the past few months had been forgotten. So I appreciate that the media is only a co-conspirator and everything you say is absolutely right. But what can you tell us about what can be done, we as citizens, you and the media can do to try to assist the media to become perhaps a positive force rather than a co-conspirator in addressing some of the problems you identify?
I know I'm going to regret using that phrase. There's a tremendous number of good points that you've raised, and I'll try to deal with some of them, but it does strike me off the top that you may have provided the subject for the institution's next conference, and it could be that something along the lines of if Peter Mansbridge declares the government, can the Governor General change it? To try to be more serious about your question, I think the media has fallen into the same trap as the public, and to a certain extent parties and MPs and parliamentarians. And, you know, for want of a better way of putting it, I think of it as the sort of the Wizard of Oz syndrome. Like, we all now believe that that person behind that facade is not just a little man with a little voice that's being amplified, but is really all powerful. And so we don't, I'm speaking now of the media, we don't really cover the rest of government. I mean, we all traipse across to the Hill at 3 o'clock after question period and do the story of the day. And, you know, it's quite frankly fascinating to watch, because every young journalist is taught, you know, go out on your own and, you know, get something unique, you know, just writing everybody else's story. But on Parliament Hill, it's the reverse pattern. I mean, nobody ever got a unique story or an exclusive standing around doing scrums at 3 o'clock on Parliament Hill. Yet that's what we do. That's the culture. So I think to a certain extent we've been drawn into this culture, and we've been drawn into the hyper-partisan nature of Parliament and the proceedings of the horse race is what interests us. We're not terribly interested in public policy. You know, and maybe that's, you know, a factor of many complicated issues in the state of newspapers and other things, but the reality is there isn't a lot of discussion of public policy either in the papers or among journalists, except in terms of the horse race. Like, is EI an important issue? Well, it depends on who's gaining advantage. So there isn't a lot of consideration of that, nor are there a lot of rewards for individual journalists to pursue that course. So I think, you know, it's a simplistic answer, but it's kind of the simplistic answer I offered in general, and I think that's to demand better. I mean, I think you should be mad as hell, to use that old television or movie, it was Peter Finch, wasn't it? Yeah, mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. And I mean, I think that's really needs to be run through parties and the political system and Parliament, but also in your reaction to newspapers and what you want to read. I mean, my own view is that, you know, the survival of newspapers is going to be dependent on on speaking to a class of readers who are interested in public policy, because you can get the rest of the stuff everywhere else. So I think you need to demand more of us. Politicians and parties need to demand more of themselves. But how we get it going, I don't know, because now I'm rambling a bit, so you can throw something at me. But I was really struck. A poll came out yesterday on H1N1. And we in the media have been covering this as, well, maybe this is a seminal moment for the Conservatives. I mean, finally people will be saying, something's gone wrong in Ottawa that affects my life, and therefore I'm interested again, I'm engaged. I mean, as a crisis management plan, this was an absolute disaster. I mean, they never even gave any thought to what would happen if Canadians in huge numbers wanted to be vaccinated. They just assumed they weren't going to be. People were going to be resistant, and they planned around that, and nobody ever put up their hand and said, so what happens if we're wrong? So we've all been writing about this and talking about this, saying this is a huge disaster for the government. Canadians don't seem to care. Maybe they're way smarter than we are in saying, look, this is going to be just another thing that's managed. But the end result is the Canadians are kind of saying, well, I think it's okay, it's kind of a mess, but I don't really care. So if we don't care about the delivery of health care in the middle of a pandemic, I don't know how we're going to generate a whole lot of interest over more arcane subjects, such as the destruction of parliamentary officers as watchdogs over Parliament, or even that's fairly emotional compared to some of the really dry stuff we should be talking about in Ottawa. For example, what options is the government going to choose, whatever government is elected, to get us beyond the deficits? I mean, those are huge problems that nobody is even talking about in Ottawa. Sorry, I really rambled on that, but it was kind of a rambling question.